Welcome back to another video on my channel, and this video is all about the new Sony A7R Mark V, which just came to market. This is one of the first which hit the Swiss market, so here in Switzerland, and I'm going to compare this new camera with the flagship camera from Sony, the Sony Alpha 1. I'm also loading it with compact flash Express Type A cards. I'm also looking quickly into a SmallRig, which you need for video filming and movie taking. It's the same what I use on my Alpha 1, and the outcome of the video will be that you know all the differences between the Sony A7R Mark V and the Sony Alpha 1. You will learn a lot about the features of this new Sony camera, and you will have a good basis for making your own decision which of the two cameras is for you. Let's kick off the video. I'm now going to unbox the new Sony A7R Mark V, and I will do this very quickly and in the meaning of the word quick, because I will do this in a time lapse. We'll then later quickly look in what's all in the box, and then we start with a comparison of this new Sony camera with the flagship Sony Alpha 1. Alright, unboxing done. So what's in the box? First of all, the camera body. If you want to confirm what type of camera it is, you have to look here. It's the A7R Mark V, and that's of course what we were after. And then we have here a USB-C cable to USB-A. That's important if you want to go for firmware updates, for instance, or transfer images. We have a charger here. The charger comes with two cables, one for the European Union here. This is this one. And this one here, I guess, is for the UK. We also have a battery, of course, which we are going to load in a moment. We have a shoulder strap, and we have some accessory to get cables firmly mounted to the camera body. And then we have a 1-year extended warranty invitation, which is nice, of course. The next step is to load the camera with memory cards. And I've decided here to go for super expensive cards. So these are from Sony. They have 640 gigabyte, which means you don't have to swap cards on the go. They have a speed of reading from 800 megabit per second and writing from 700 megabit per second, and they are super robust. And it's a compact flash Express Type A card, and I can strongly recommend them, although they are super expensive. So let's get them out here and let's load them into the camera, and then we can format them and can start. So here we go. That's the card. If you think about what you pay for a small memory card like this, you actually have an urgent need to throw up. But you know, it is what it is. And we talk here about an 8K capable camera, and we can shoot uncompressed RAW. And that means we need a lot of storage besides some high speed on the camera internal processes. The memory card compartment is like always on the Sony Alpha 7 series here on the side. So you unlock it, you open it, and then we are good to go to insert the memory cards. And here is compact flash card Type A number 1. And here is the second one. And since I use these slots typically for backup, I need to make sure I have the same reading and writing speed on both cards. Otherwise, the lower speed card will always slow the other one down. And then you don't have any benefit from having a high speed writing card for 8K video and for uncompressed RAW and 10 frames per second, what this camera is capable of. So make sure if you go for both slots, you have the same speed in terms of capabilities on both cards. Last but not least, I have now to load the battery here, which I will do. That's this one here. It's the same battery as what we have on the Sony Alpha 1, the 7S Mark III, the 7R Mark IV. It's always kind of the same battery, and you just slot it in here. And I'm going to load this in the camera body. So I will connect a USB-C cable. I guess that's here. Yes, here we go. That's the USB-C port. And then I load it through the camera body and not via the external charger. And then I will be back likely in a couple of hours. And then we can start our comparison between the Sony A7R Mark V and the flagship Sony Alpha 1. I shot the Sony Alpha 1 a lot in the last months, but I never reviewed it on my channel. So let's have a look into a few sample images, which I selected, and then let's move on to a side-by-side comparison of the new Sony A7R Mark V and the flagship Sony Alpha 1. When I tried to find a side-by-side comparison of the new Sony A7R Mark V and the Sony Alpha 1, it turned out to be not that easy. And the reason is, yes, you find a lot of side-by-side comparisons in the web, but some of them are not complete. Some of them have a lot of text and blah blah around. That's not what I like. And some of them even make mistakes or have pre-production specifications. So I went to the Sony website here, and on the left hand side you see the A7R Mark V. I can scroll through all the specifications, and on the right hand side I have the Sony Alpha 1, and then line item by line item comparing them finally gave me a clear picture what these cameras have in common and what they have in terms of differences. Going through the common features and of course also through the differences. First of all, both sensors in both cameras have an aspect ratio of 3:2 and the same anti-dust system. But the sensors are different. On the A7R5 on the left hand side we have an effective resolution of 61 megapixels, and on the right hand side on the Sony Alpha 1 we have 50.1 megapixels. And there is another very important difference. So both sensors are backside illuminated, so you can catch a lot of light with both cameras, and you saw before on the A1 slideshow my Milky Way pictures, and you can do exactly the same with the same quality on the A7R Mark V. But the Sony A1 has an Exmor RS CMOS sensor, whereas the A7R5 has an Exmor R CMOS sensor. And the S on the A1 stands for stacked. And a stacked sensor means that the sensor can deliver much faster autofocus speed and has typically also a much faster readout time, which is good for the electronic shutter to avoid rolling shutter effects. Comparing the different resolutions and formats for recording still images, there are some differences which are all exclusively coming from the different resolutions of the two sensors, namely on the A7R5 effectively 61 megapixels and on the A1 50.1 megapixels, but there's not much to add here. Moving from still image recording to movie recording, we find quite a lot of differences here. First of all, there are similarities: recording format, video compression, audio recording format, color space. Both cameras have picture effects and creative style. The A7R5 has in addition a menu entry for a soft skin effect, which you can see here. When you look into the menu of the Alpha 1 here, you find here the D-range optimizer, you find the creative look and the picture profile, and you find the same here on the A7R5. So D-range optimizer, creative look and picture profile, but you have in addition that menu entry for a soft skin effect, which you don't have on the Alpha 1. So there is a difference here, of course, but not a major difference, and there are lots of similarities if you go through the menus of these two cameras. But the differences then kick in, of course, when you look into the movie recording system and you look into different formats and, for instance, frames per second and so on. So both cameras can shoot in 8K video, but the A7R5 can do so only with 24p, whereas the Alpha 1 can go to 30p. And you find some tiny little differences and nuances here. In general, we can say that the Sony Alpha 1 is more capable when it comes to video, but the A7R5 brings a lot to the table and has a lot of advanced features which you typically don't find in a standard full-frame camera. Looking into the slow and quick motion recording options for video shooting on the two cameras, again the Alpha 1 is superior. On the right hand side you see, for instance, on slow motion you can go up to 240 FPS, whereas on the A7R5 you can only go to 120 FPS. And there are some differences here, of course. At the bottom of this spec sheet we find one section which is empty for the Alpha 1 and is filled on the A7R5, and that's USB streaming. And USB streaming is an easier way than usual if you want to use your A7 series camera for web streaming and for video calls. And that's not a feature the A1 has, but the A7R5 has it, and you find this if you look into the Sony website for the compatibility chart, what cameras in the 7 series are compatible with USB streaming. Then you find here prominently placed and newly placed, of course, the A7R Mark V. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the Alpha 1 is not capable to be used as a webcam. And you just have to use different software, which you can download at the Sony website. It's called Imaging Edge Webcam. And if you download that and then connect your camera, your Alpha 1 appropriately, you also can use the Sony Alpha 1 as a webcam and for video calls. Moving on to other features, so the memory card slots on both cameras are the same, the media which you use for recording and storage are the same. You can also customize them in exactly the same way how you use the two slots, so simultaneous recording or auto switch, flow over, what have you. The location information link from a smartphone is available on both cameras, noise reduction system is the same, white balance modes is the same. And here we have a lot of similarities. Turning our attention to focus, they both have face detection and contrast detection autofocus. And they have, of course, the difference in the sensor. I mentioned before that the Alpha 1 has an Exmor RS sensor, and S stands for stacked. So we can expect and actually see it in the specifications that autofocus on the Alpha 1 is substantially quicker than what we have on the A7R5, but the A7R5 is very quick too. We have the same on focus sensitivity range, and we also have an autofocus illuminator and the same range for illumination. Where we have differences is that the A7R5 has a newly developed artificial intelligence processing unit, and that also enhances now subject recognition. So you have here not only humans, animals like you have on the Alpha 1, you have here also birds, insects, cars, trains, airplanes. So you have quite a bunch of more things which are recognized by I would call it a neural processing engine. And that is of course very nice. Other differences we find here when putting the specs side by side is the number of focus points. So on the A7R5 we have 693 face detection autofocus points. That's plenty of course. But on the Alpha 1 you get a bit more. It's 759 face detection autofocus points. We also see that there is a new focus mode on the A7R5 which is not on the Alpha 1. And that's AFA or automatic autofocus. And that is a mode where the camera by its own built-in intelligence is recognizing whether a subject is moving and then switches automatically from single focus to continuous focus, and that's not implemented on the Alpha 1. Looking into focus area, I actually placed both cameras here side by side and looked into the different modes here. They are kind of the same, and there is only one tiny little difference, but I don't think that moves the needle, so I gave it in my assessment here a green checkbox. We have the same specifications when it comes to the focus area. Moving on to the exposure section of the specs, a lot of similarities here. I don't go through all of them. I want to point out the differences on metering sensor. Again, we have the difference between a stacked sensor on the Alpha 1 and just a backside illuminated sensor on the A7R5. And on exposure bracketing, we have a bit more flex on the A7R5, so we can go for 2, 3, 5, 7, 9 frames. Whereas on the Alpha 1 we can only choose between 3, 5 and 9 frames. The electronic viewfinder is the same on both cameras, acronymed EVF of course, and it's an OLED screen which is embedded here, absolutely brilliant, super clear, has more than 9.4 million of dots, 100% field coverage, same magnification on both cameras of 0.9 times. But differences we find again in the LCD screen. First of all, the adjustment options you have on the LCD on the A7R5 give you much more flex. I'm going to show that quickly when we look later into the design features. And we also have a slightly larger LCD on the A7R5 with 8 cm compared to 7.5 cm on the Alpha 1. And we also have a higher resolution on the A7R5 with 2.1 million of dots, whereas on the Alpha 1 we have 1.44 million of dots. And that is clearly something which can move the needle for some people if you pre-check a lot of images on your LCD screen. If you look into other features and the shutter, we also have some differences here. So first of all, both cameras have a clear image zoom, which is a nice feature Sony typically embeds into their Alpha 7 series cameras. But on the A7R5 you can now also go to approximately a 1.5 times clear image zoom if you use 8K video. That's currently working on the Alpha 1 only in the 4K video mode. And we have also a tiny little difference here on digital zoom, which I don't want to cover. I think what is more relevant is on the shutter side. First of all, we have on both cameras a mechanical and an electronic shutter. And on the mechanical shutter, both cameras can go as fast as 1/8000 seconds. But on the A7R5, the electronic shutter also is in its fastest mode at 1/8000 seconds of shutter speed. Whereas on the Alpha 1, you can go on the electronic shutter as fast as 1/32,000 seconds. And that's of course super fast, so 1/32,000 seconds, and that is featured by the stack design of the sensor we have in the Sony Alpha 1 in comparison to the A7R5, where we do not have a stacked sensor design. What also matters, of course, is that, again, probably based on the stack design, which also allows for a higher readout time of the sensor, you have a higher flash swing speed on the Alpha 1 of up to 1/400 seconds, whereas in the full frame scenario, you get stuck on the A7R5 with 1/250 seconds, which is the usual value you have on these type of cameras and sensors. Image stabilization, which is an in-body image stabilization based on sensor shifts, is further improved on the A7R5. So the spec sheet talks here about 8 stops based on the CIPA standard, whereas on the Alpha 1 we have 5.5 stops. And I think that is something people will appreciate because you can go for longer exposures handhold. And on the flash control side, except the fact what I covered before, namely that the flash swing speed is higher on the Alpha 1, everything is the same on the flash control side. So here, nothing to add. Pixel shift multi-shooting is the same on both cameras, so you can go for high resolution images and the camera uses 4 shots or respectively 16 shots for that, which are compiled together then later on, and which again shifts the sensor and uses the in-body image stabilization mechanism for a pixel shift. And then on the drive mode we have, I think, a significant difference, because in terms of exposure bracketing and DRO bracketing, both cameras offer the same options, but on the A7R5 you also have focus bracketing. Looking into the menu system of the Alpha 1, we have here the bracket settings. So this is here just below the self-timer type, and then going into bracket settings we have here the bracket type, and then we can tweak this in terms of how many images, how much EV values we want to have in the distance setting, and so on. So that works in the usual way. But then on the A7R Mark V, if we go into bracket settings, we have an additional menu entry, which is focus bracket settings. And that is of course very useful, in particular if you are a macro shooter or product photographer. Then focus bracketing takes away a lot of the burden and the work you have when you shoot at a close distance with a macro lens. And that is quite nice, of course. Both cameras also allow for white balance bracketing, which can be useful. And then on this particular page here, we have a couple of more differences in terms of the number of recordable frames and the playback modes, which I don't want to cover. In terms of interfaces on the camera body, they are exactly the same with one exception, and I'm going to show that in a moment when I quickly go through the design features. The Alpha 1 has in the camera body a local area network terminal, and that is of course quite useful if you don't want to rely on wireless connections but want to go for a LAN terminal. Then you can do so on the Alpha 1, and then on the A7R5 you have a bit more customization, but that again does not move the needle as a distinction criteria here. And then we have here a few more specifications, and that concludes my walkthrough line item by line item. And there are tiny little differences here which are so marginal that I decided to give them a green checkbox instead of calling out a difference. So for instance, on battery life, you have approximately 100 minutes with LCD monitor on the A7R5, and you have about 95 minutes on the Sony Alpha 1 if you shoot with LCD monitor. That's really not worthwhile to call out the difference. Same for instance on the size and weight. Tiny little differences in terms of dimensions. If you see them side by side, the two cameras, you hardly notice the differences. So again, I gave it a green checkbox, although there is technically a difference here in the dimensions. And then on the weight side, the same. The Alpha 7R5 is at 723 gram and the Alpha 1 is at 737 gram. That's clearly not a distinction criteria. So yes, it's different technically, but at the very end, it's about the same. Let's look into the most important design differences between these two cameras. I don't want to cover everything, but at least show a few things here on these two camera bodies. And first of all, on the Alpha 1, we have this brilliant mode dial here. So here you can go, for instance, for your burst modes, bracketing, self-timer. You have here on that scale, which you can move differently here. You have here autofocus single, autofocus continuous, DMF and manual focus, which is quite nice. And on the A7R5, this is empty. So there is just the marking here for the sensor plane where it is. And then of course the indication of the camera model we have, A7R5, but that's all. The back sides of the two camera bodies look almost exactly the same, except that the movie recording button on the Alpha 1 sits here, and on the A7R5 it sits here at the top of the camera body. On the mode dial for the shooting mode, I have here on the Alpha 1 also my slow and quick motion setting. On that dial here, I have to push the button, then I can turn it, otherwise it's locked, which is very convenient. And on the A7R5, the S&Q mode is not here. but it's sitting here on a second control wheel below that mode dial here. And there is a button here and you need to push it in order to move it, otherwise you cannot move it. And then I have here my still image mode, I have my video mode, and I have my slow and quick motion mode. So that is a design difference we see here. Another design difference I noticed was that the exposure compensation dial here has markings, and that is clearly something you can use. So you see it here. Here we have a bit more customization, so there are no markings, so you can also customize these wheels here in a different way, in the same way as you could do it on the Alpha 1 on this control wheel, but here you have exposure compensation. And maybe I do another tutorial on how to customize the A7R5 and the Alpha 1 if you want so, but I would need to find out if people really have interest to see this or if there is enough coverage already on YouTube. The last design difference I want to point out is the tilt flip screen on the A7R5. And on the A1 you can also get the screen out in the usual way, and that's typically good enough for me, nothing more I need. But on the A7R5 you have more flex. First of all, you can also get your screen out in this way and for instance use it for selfies or monitoring your video recording, and that's quite nice, of course, in particular for video bloggers. And you can also get it in protection mode. You just flip it here and then the LCD screen is inside the camera body and will not suffer from scratches. And you also have here, let me get this back, you also have the same direction to get the screen out as you have it on the Alpha 1. So much more flex, and some people will appreciate it. For me it's not necessary, but you know, it's some additional feature you might want to use once in a while. Most camera sensors in the world are actually produced by Sony, also for a lot of other manufacturers of cameras. That's why my expectations when I look into a flagship like the Alpha 1 here, or in a top-notch pro camera like the A7R5 are typically very high. But Sony is not also known for manufacturing excellent sensors, they also produce excellent lenses. And here on the A7R5 I have mounted now the new G Master Mark II 24-70 f2.8, and I used to shoot with the 24-70 f2.8 before, but then I sold it and purchased the Mark II version, and that is worth a review by its own. But that's one of the lenses I will clearly shoot on my new A7R5. And then if you think about what you typically need, the other lens you might want to have is the other G Master 2 lens. It's the 70-200mm f2.8, and these are the only two lenses which are remade by Sony and improved from the former G Master version. So these are the only two G Master 2 lenses you currently have in the Sony system. And if you are a pro photographer, that's kind of all you need. You need an absolute terrific and reliable camera body with a full frame sensor, high speed, 10 frames per second, you know, very good image quality, high resolution. You need a standard zoom, 24-70, and the extended zoom of 70-200. With that you can cover basically any photographic situation you can think of. A lens I will also test in the next weeks towards Christmas on the A7R5 is the new Tamron lens here. So this is a 50-400mm lens, f4.5 to 6.3, and it's an absolutely brilliant lens. I've never seen such a spectrum of focal length in one lens. 50-400mm, and Tamron makes in particular for Sony absolutely excellent lenses, and I will test this lens. If I like it, I come back to my channel. If I don't like it, I come back too and tell you why I didn't like it. Stay tuned so you don't miss that video and my review of this absolutely spectacular and very rare lens with a focal length spectrum from 50mm to 400mm. What I also use on my Sony Alpha 1 for video shooting and will use on the A7R5 is a cage from SmallRig, and that is very useful for holding your camera and getting a more smooth and steady workflow. So let's open this up here. Let's see what's inside so you can see it. Here we go. That's a SmallRig. I'm going to mount this now, and then I will show you why this is so much more comfortable when you hold the camera for video shooting. This is how it looks like when you mounted the SmallRig. It has very low weight, it's not really contributing, a little bit of course, and it helps you to mount additional accessories like an LED light or my Atomos Ninja 5 Plus, what I like to use when I shoot for my channel, because then I can show how the autofocus is reacting, and the camera menu on a much better screen can also record it. So you have all kinds of options here what you can mount. and I think that is a good accessory to purchase. It's, by the way, the same SmallRig as what you had for the A7R4, so it's still compatible with the A7R5. And then we have here something else I typically mount on top of it. It's also SmallRig. Let's have a look here. Get this out. And that is the hand grip. And that is very convenient for video shooting, as I will show you in a second. So this is how it looks like if the top grip or the top handle is mounted. And then you have a very good grip here to actually have a very smooth and stable and steady workflow for video recording. And that is something I appreciate. By the way, these type of cages also protect the camera body a little bit, and as I said, it's not too much weight and it's quite convenient. And on top of it here, I can now mount my Atomos Ninja 5 Plus, for instance. I can also mount it on the side. There are lots of connections here on that cage which you can use, and for video shooters, this is a superior way of taking videos. The top handle also has a button here, and here on the side it has a USB-C connection, and it comes with a bunch of cables here, and you can connect this to your Sony camera body and then also control with that here the record button for video taking or for photo taking, and it works like a charm. So I recommend this. By the way, I'm not paid by SmallRig. I just purchased this with my own money, and typically for the Sony cameras, which I use more frequently for video shooting than other cameras, I want to have that SmallRig and the top grip because it makes my video shooting so much superior to just having the camera body in the hand and not having as much control as if I use that cage here from SmallRig. And typically when I'm lazy, I don't remove the cage, I leave the cage on, but I remove the top handle, and that's very easy to do here. You just have it like this, and then you can slide it out, and then the camera has not this top handle, and you can shoot in the normal way if you want, and can still use this here for mounting all types of accessories like an LED light and what have you. Let's wrap up the video and everything we discussed in the last 20 plus minutes. So if you're a pro video shooter, a professional photographer, someone who loves a speedy, high resolution, excellent sensor, then the A7R5 is for you. This camera is feature packed. It's a really good camera. It's a very natural evolution of the Sony A7R4, and I like a lot the features and everything I see in that camera. I still have to test out image quality, but given that we have an improved sensor, improved in-body image stabilization, but kind of the same concept as what we had on the A7R4, I'm quite sure that I will not be disappointed. If you are a pro videographer and videography is what you like most doing with your camera, then I think the Sony Alpha 1 might be superior, because both cameras have an 8K video mode, they have excellent 4K video mode, but you get a bit more out of the Alpha 1 than what you get out of the A7R5, in the way I pointed out when we talked about the specifications. And then there is one other group of people who might prefer the Sony Alpha 1, and that's people who really need the very last performance on sports and action. With the A7R5 you can safely go for sports and action because the autofocus system has been improved. We have this artificial intelligence processing unit. We have more subject recognition than what we have on the Alpha 1, so it will serve you very well if you go for sports, action, wildlife, what have you. But if you need, with the electronic shutter like on the A1, 30 frames per second, and if you need that super high speed on the readout time of the sensor, then the Alpha 1 is clearly the one to go for because it's optimized for speed. Also on the shutter speed side, both have mechanical and electronic shutter, but here the maximum, or the fastest shutter speed I should say, is 1/8000 seconds mechanically and electronically. On the Alpha 1 you can go mechanically to 1/8000 seconds, but on the electronic shutter to 1/32,000 seconds, and that is clearly an advantage. So if you are drilled for sports and action and go significantly beyond the normal use of sports and action photography, then the Alpha 1 might be the one you should consider and should maybe not go for the A7R5. Having said that, the price difference between the two is significant, and you know, we talk here about, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, $3,900, and here give or take $6,500, and that gives you a couple of nice lenses if you consider the price difference, which you get in addition for the same overall amount of money spent if you go for that camera. So again, if you are price conscious, then the A7R5 will give you everything you need for a significantly lower price tag than what you have on the Alpha 1. Besides shooting the A7R5 with my G Master 2 lenses, and a bunch of other lenses like the Tamron. And you know, here for instance I have currently mounted the 135mm G Master f1.8. So I will test out a bunch of lenses on this new camera, but besides that, what I will also test is, what about the electronic shutter? Will it be quick enough in the readout time of the sensor to have no significant rolling shutter effects if you go for electronic shutter and for complete silent shooting? So that's a video which is about to come. If you liked that video, don't forget to drop me a thumbs up. Stay tuned on my channel, there is always more to come. Thanks for watching, stay safe and healthy, and of course, peace out.